My mother pointed her finger at me and said, "Stop blaming your sister. Not at the person who stole her car. Not at the person who crashed it. At me." And I smiled. Not because anything was funny. Because I knew, in about 30 seconds, her entire world was going to flip. Let me tell you how we got there. To understand that smile, you have to understand the silence I grew up in. My name is Alexandra. I was 37 when this happened. Marketing coordinator. At a mid-size agency, steady job, decent pay, nothing flashy. I ran 3 miles. Every morning before the sun came up, I paid my own rent, my own car note, my own everything. I'd been doing that since I was 19. I am a creature of habit. Every night before bed, I arrange 3 things on the mahogany dresser to the left of my bed. Wallet, phone, keys, always in the same spot, always. My sister Jessica was 34. She'd never held a job longer than 5 months. When I was 12, Jessica wore my birthday dress before I did. She'd found it in the closet, tried it on, and by the time I came home from school, there was a stain on the collar. My mother said, "Let her have it, Alex. You're the big sister." I didn't cry. I changed into my old dress and went to my own birthday party. At 19, my mother used the money she'd saved for my college, $4,000, $200, to pay off Jessica's credit card debt. "Your sister needs it." "More," she said. "You'll figure it out." And I did. Scholarships, 2 jobs. I figured it out. At 25, Jessica copied the key to my apartment without asking. I changed the locks. My mother called me cold. The pattern was always the same. Jessica took. Jessica got caught. Jessica cried. My mother protected her, and I adapted. My sister took a lot of things over the years. My clothes, my space, my mother's attention. But that Saturday morning, she took something that wasn't mine to lose. The night before this happened, my mother pressed her car key into my hand while we stood in the kitchen. "Alex," she said, dropping her voice to that conspiratorial whisper she used when she wanted a favor. "Move the SUV closer to the garage in the morning. The tree. Trimmers are coming at 9. I don't want any branches scratching the paint." I nodded, took the key, clipped it onto my ring. My ring, which normally held the key to my own sedan. But my sedan wasn't in the driveway that night. It was sitting in a service bay, 3 towns over, getting a transmission overhaul. The only car in the driveway was my mother's pride and joy, a white Chevrolet Traverse, brand new, $58,000. She'd spent the last 3 weeks finding reasons to drive it, even just to buy a gallon of milk, always parking at just the right angle so Mrs. Gable next door could see the custom rims. I put the key on my ring and went to bed. Jessica didn't know any of this. At 3:17 in the morning, she ghosted into my room in the dark. She saw the familiar silhouette of my key ring on the dresser. She didn't check the fob, didn't look out the window, didn't ask. She just grabbed and went, assuming she was borrowing my beat-up sedan for a weekend trip with her friends. She had no idea she'd just taken the most expensive thing my mother had ever owned. I woke up at 8 to the sound of my own hand sweeping the empty dresser. My wallet was there. My phone was there, buzzing against the charger. But the keyring was gone. I stood up, walked to the window, pulled back the curtain. The driveway was empty. My stomach dropped through the floor. I stood there in my t-shirt, staring at the oil stain on the concrete where $58,000 of German engineering used to sit. My brain started running the math before my emotions could catch up. Then my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, no greeting, just a photo attachment. I opened it and felt the air leave my lungs. The white Traverse, my mother's silver chariot, was wrapped around a telephone. Pole, like a discarded soda can. The front end accordioned into itself. The hood, buckled up like a piece of crumpled paper. Airbags deployed, hanging limp and white from the dashboard. Shattered glass sparkling on the asphalt like cruel diamonds. The driver's side door wrenched open and left that way. Another text arrived. "Did Jess tell you yet? We're all okay, but the car is totaled. We went to the lake for this party. Jess was drinking, but she swore she was fine to drive back. Happened around 5 a.m. on the back road near the quarry. It was from Sarah, one of Jessica's friends, a girl I'd met maybe twice. I stared at the words, reading them twice to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. Drinking, lake party, totaled. My hands were steady. Inside, a cold fury was rising. Not hot, not explosive. Cold, the kind that doesn't shake. I took screenshots of everything, the photo of the wreck, the texts from Sarah, the timestamps, saved them to a cloud folder, emailed them to myself. Then I opened the Ring app. My mother had given me access years ago, just in case. I found the 3:17 a.m. footage immediately. Jessica, stumbling up the driveway. The Travers swaying as she pulled in, clipping the neighbor's fence before coming to a stop. The driver's door left hanging open. Jessica walking inside. Without looking back, I watched it once, closed the app, put the phone in my pocket. Then I went downstairs and waited. My mother came downstairs 20 minutes later with a steaming mug of hazelnut. Coffee, humming softly. She looked rested. The picture of a woman ready for a peaceful Sunday morning. That picture evaporated the moment she saw my face. "Alex, what's wrong?" "The SUV is gone," I said, voice flat. I watched her face move through confusion, then concern, then sharp panic. She rushed to the window, pulled the curtains back so hard, I thought the rod would snap, stared at the empty concrete, then whipped around. I held up my phone, showed her the photo. She snatched it from my hand. Her eyes darted over the image, the crumpled hood, the shattered windshield, the white deflated airbags. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God, what happened?" "Jessica," I said. "She took my keys off the dresser while I was asleep. She thought she was taking my car. She didn't know my car was at the shop. She didn't know the only key on my ring was yours." My mother collapsed onto the couch as if her legs had turned to water. She stared at the photo for a long, silent minute, and then I watched it happen. I saw the wall go up, the familiar, impenetrable wall she had spent 20 years building. "Are you sure?" she said, voice gaining a desperate edge. "I'm sure. Her friend sent me the photos. My keys are missing. Your car is missing." No, Jessica wouldn't. Not my new car. She knows how much I worked for it." She stood up and started pacing. "Maybe someone broke in. Maybe a thief took the keys. There must be a mistake." I didn't argue. I just watched her spiral. 4 hours later, the front door opened. Jessica stepped into the hallway looking like she'd been through a war. Makeup smeared down her cheeks, clothes wrinkled and stained, a small red cut above her right eyebrow that she'd tried to cover with a strip of foundation that had since worn off. My mother rushed to her. "Jessica, oh God, are you okay? What happened?" Jessica glanced at me. Her eyes swept the room, calculating. "I stayed at a friend's house," she said, her voice thick. "I borrowed a car to get there. I just needed to get away for a bit." She didn't mention the crash. She was banking on the hope that we hadn't figured it out yet. I held up my phone. The photo glowed on the screen. Her face went white. All of it, like the confidence, the practiced innocence, drained out of her like color from a photograph. She started stammering. It's not what it looks like. I can explain." My mother turned to her. "What is going on, Jessica?" And then Jessica did the thing she had been doing her entire life when she felt cornered. She attacked. She pointed a trembling finger at me. "He said I could." The words landed in the room like something thrown. "Alex gave me permission. He told me it was fine. He left the keys out for me on the dresser. He knew." Her voice broke into sobs. Big, theatrical tears she had been perfecting since middle school. "And the crash wasn't my fault. A truck ran me off the road. I was so scared. Mom, I was traumatized." My mother turned to me. And I saw it, the look I knew better than my own reflection. The accusing, disappointed glare, the one that said, "I want to believe her. Help me believe her." "Did you give her permission, Alex?" I felt my chest tighten, not from anger, from recognition. This was the pattern. This had always been the pattern. "No," I said. "I was asleep. She took the keys from my dresser without asking." just like she always does. Liar! Jessica's voice cracked. You're lying because you want to get me in. Trouble. You're jealous. You've always been jealous of me. My mother's face softened as she looked back at her crying daughter. She took one step toward Jessica. And then she said the words I'd heard 1,000 times. Alex, why do you always have to make things difficult? To me, not to the person who crashed her car. To me. I looked at them. The enabler and the manipulator, perfectly synchronized. A script so well rehearsed it ran on its own. And I felt something settle in my chest. Quiet. Still. I smiled. What's funny? My mother asked. Why are you smiling? Nothing's funny, I said. I just want to ask you one question. The kitchen went very quiet. Have you checked the Ring doorbell? 6 words. Jessica's face changed. Not all at once. It was like watching the color bleed out. Of a photograph, frame by frame, the confident posture, the practiced tears, the wide, innocent eyes. All of it sliding off her face like wet paint. What? She said. But it wasn't a question. It was a prayer. My mother frowned, picked up her phone, opened the Ring app. I didn't say anything. I didn't point. I didn't explain. I just waited. The kitchen was silent except for the sound of the video playing on her phone. 3:17 a.m. Jessica stumbling up the driveway, the Travers swaying, clipping the fence. The driver's door left open. Jessica walking inside without looking back. My mother watched it once. Then she watched it again. She lowered the phone, and she looked up, not at me. At Jessica. The silence that followed was the loudest thing that house had ever held. Jessica opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Mom, I can explain. But for the first time in 34 years, my mother didn't say, I stopped blaming your sister. She didn't say anything at all. Then I asked my second question. Do you want to call the insurance company, or should I? Jessica's face went white again, a different kind of white this time, because she understood immediately what that question meant. The insurance company would ask what happened, and my mother would have to choose, tell the truth or commit fraud. Jessica turned to me. Her voice had dropped to something raw and desperate. Alex, please, you could fix this. You could tell them it was a misunderstanding. We're family. I looked at her. I thought about the birthday dress, the college money, the copied apartment key, the 20 years of being called cold for simply refusing to disappear. Family doesn't steal from each other, I said. Family doesn't lie to each other. And family doesn't ask the person they wronged to clean up the mess. I set my coffee cup down on the counter, very carefully, and I waited for my mother to decide. My mother called the insurance company that afternoon. She told the truth. The Ring footage was undeniable. Jessica had taken the car. Jessica had been drinking. Jessica had crashed it. There was no truck. There was no road accident. There was no misunderstanding. The claims adjuster called back the next morning. Family member damage is excluded under your policy. The driver was not listed. There was evidence of intoxication. We cannot cover this claim. My mother hung up and sat down at the kitchen table very slowly, surrounded by a mountain of paperwork and a laptop glowing in the dim afternoon light. She had put a significant down payment on the Travers. She still owed $35,000 to the bank. The car was now worth exactly what the scrapyard would pay for twisted silver metal. Jessica emerged from her room and sat down across the table. She said she'd get a job. She'd pay back every cent. My mother looked at her over the rim of her reading glasses. Jessica, at minimum wage, working full-time, it would take you nearly 3 years. Just to pay off the loan balance. That doesn't include interest. That doesn't include a new car for me. That doesn't include your own living expenses. Jessica started crying again. I don't know what else to say. Maybe, my mother said, her voice tired, you should have thought about that before you stole a car. An hour later, there was a soft knock on my bedroom door. My mother came in. She looked like she had aged 10 years in 10 hours. Eyes red-rimmed, shoulders caved inward, hands folded in her lap like she didn't know what else to do with them. She sat down on the edge of my bed, in the same spot she used to sit when I was a child, and something had gone wrong. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I'm sorry. I should have believed you. I didn't want to believe it." I didn't say, "I know." I didn't say, "It's okay." I just said, "I know, Mom." She nodded, looked at her hands. I don't know what to do. "It's not my problem to solve," I said, gently, firmly. "I'm not the one who stole the car. I'm not the one who spent 20 years making excuses for someone who never faced a consequence." She flinched, but she didn't argue. She knew I was right. "What should I do?" she asked. "That's up to you," I said, "but I'll give my statement to whoever needs it. Insurance, police, whoever." She nodded again, slower this time. Then she stood up, smoothed her skirt, and walked to the door. She paused with her hand on the knob. "Thank you, Alex." "For what?" "For telling the truth, even when I didn't want to hear it." She closed the door. I lay back on my bed and stared at the ceiling fan, spinning slowly in the afternoon heat. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt a quiet stillness, the kind that arrives after a very long storm. Over the next 2 weeks, my sister's world came apart, not in one explosion. In layers, the way it always should have. My mother put Jessica's bags on the front porch, 3 suitcases and a garbage bag. "I can't look at you in this house right now," she said. It was the first time in 34 years she'd ever asked her to leave. Jessica moved in with the friend who had sent me the crash photos. That friendship lasted 2 weeks. Then she was calling my mother from a stranger's couch, saying she had nowhere to go, saying she was scared. My mother's voice when she answered that call was steady, calm, final, figure it out the way adults do. She sold the Travers to a scrapyard for $3,000. Drove a rental for 2 months, then bought a used sedan with cash. Practical, reliable, nothing flashy. She told me, "I'm done trying to impress people, and I'm done making excuses for people who don't respect me." "That sounds like a good plan," I said. One evening, my mother and I were sitting at the kitchen table with cups of tea, and she asked me something she'd been holding for weeks. "Why were you smiling that morning? And when I pointed at you and said, 'Stop blaming your sister,' you smiled. I've been thinking about it ever since." I looked at her. "Because I already knew," I said. "I'd seen the ring footage at 6 a.m. before you came downstairs. I knew exactly what happened, exactly who did it, and exactly what the video showed." She was quiet. When you turned to me and said I was the problem, I wasn't angry. I was almost relieved, because I knew the truth had been sitting in your phone for 12 hours, and all it needed was for someone to look. "You weren't going to tell me?" she asked. "I was going to ask you one question," I said, "and let you find it yourself." My mother sat with that for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, "All those years I told you to stop blaming her. How many times did you know I was wrong?" I didn't answer right away. "It doesn't matter now," I said. "What matters is that you looked." 6 months went by. The seasons changed, so did the atmosphere in that house. My mother seemed lighter, the way a person looks when they've finally put down a backpack they'd been carrying so long they'd forgotten it was there. She told me she hadn't realized how much energy she'd been spending managing Jessica's chaos until the chaos was gone. Then one Saturday morning, Jessica showed up at the door unannounced. She looked thinner and tired, but sober. She wasn't demanding, she was asking. My mother stepped out onto the porch. I stood at the top of the stairs, listening. Jessica said she'd been in therapy. She said she'd started to understand. Not just regret getting caught, but actually understand the gravity of what she'd done. She had saved $2,000. She wanted to start paying my mother back. My mother called me down. I stepped onto the porch. Jessica looked at me, her eyes filling with tears. She apologized for the lies, for trying to turn our mother against me. She asked if I could forgive her. I looked at her for a long moment. Forgiveness isn't really the point, Jess," I said. "You didn't just crash a car, you broke trust. That takes a lot longer to fix than a transmission." She nodded, disappointed but accepting. It's been 3 months since that day. Jessica sends my mother a check for $300 every month, like a clockwork. My mother cashes them and puts the money in a separate savings account. She's not sure what she'll do with it yet, but she says accepting it is part of holding Jessica accountable. They meet for coffee occasionally. Just coffee. No borrowing money, no moving back in. Their relationship is civil, polite, distant. Maybe that's not what a family is supposed to look like. But for the first time, it's honest. Sometimes I still think about that morning. Standing in my t-shirt in the empty driveway, the oil stain on the concrete, where the car used to be, the cool hardwood floor beneath my feet, the silence of the house before everything came apart. Every time I didn't cry, every time I didn't yell, didn't argue, didn't correct. The story. I wasn't being weak. I wasn't accepting it. I was building a life where I didn't need anyone's permission to be okay. My sister took a lot of things from me over the years. My clothes, my space, my mother's attention. But the one thing she could never take was what I already knew. I didn't set a trap. I didn't gather ammunition. I didn't rehearse a speech. I just asked one question. And the truth that had been sitting in a Ring doorbell for 12 hours, did the rest. Maybe you know someone like me. Maybe you've been standing in that kitchen, holding your coffee, knowing the truth, but waiting for someone else to see it. If you have, you already know. The hardest part isn't the question. It's the silence before it. And the smile. The smile isn't revenge. It's the moment you realize you don't need to fight for something. The truth is about to prove on its own. That's all it ever was. If this story stayed with you, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever been the one standing there, knowing the truth, while someone else got believed? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want more stories like this, stories about women who chose patience over war and won, subscribe. New story every week. I'll be here. You know, the quietest revenge isn't revenge at all. It's just the truth. Sitting in a Ring doorbell at 3:17 in the morning, waiting for someone to look. Until next time.